over the course of the last 7-8 weeks, we've had a lovely time here talking about the Lord of the Rings, the Rings of Power, theorizing about what's going to happen with each character and each plotline and so on. And Dawn has been so careful, so good about preventing any spoilers from getting out into the open. And we always try to warn you if there's going to be a possible spoiler. But here's a time where, Dawn, I wish you had shared with me some of your possibly spoiler theories. Because over the course of the last few weeks, Dawn has been saying, I don't know if Halbrand is who he says he is. Maybe this Halbrand guy's not on the up and up, is what Dawn's been saying, right?
Yep.
And and every step of the way, I've been like, I don't know, Dawn. I think he might be the king who was promised. Maybe he is actually a good guy. Well, this past week, Dawn, I have finally cottoned on to a theory that apparently the entire internet has been discussing, which is that Halbrand. And okay, so before I say what it is, I have to say this is possibly a spoiler, but everyone's talking about it, and we have no confirmation of this. It's just the preponderance of circumstantial evidence points to what I'm about to say being true. Okay,
the preponderance of circumstantial evidence. My God, that is legalese if I've ever heard it. Carry on.
Here it is. Adam writes into decodingtv@gmail.com. Adam writes, I was surprised to hear you both pulling away from the theory that Halbrand is Sauron on your last episode, when the theory feels strengthened to me by each successive episode. Here's a quick summary so far. Number one, Halbrand's second line in the show is looks can be deceiving. Very suspicious for someone who is not Sauron the Deceiver. In contrast with the other unwilling King Aragorn, Halbrand has a streak of cruelty, from pushing off his companions on the driftwood to get eaten by the worm, to brutally beating up and breaking the bones of the Númenóreans in the street fight, even after they are done with him and walking away. 3. When adrift at sea, Galadriel calls attention to his medallion, of which Halbrand mentions he found it on a dead man. I feel like this is the kind of line they put there to show him being funny or chummy, but really we need to consider that it might be the literal truth. 4. Halbrand's speech about giving people a means of mastering their fears so you can master them feels like a good strategy for corrupting people. I don't think a true king of Tolkien's world would subscribe to this kind of manipulation. 5. When Galadriel tells Halbrand about the mutiny of elves, she says, they could not distinguish me from the evil I was fighting. Half a second later, rack focus to Halbrand. In the same scene, Halbrand says he's sorry about her brother. It seems like an actual apology. I think what may be happening here is Sauron may have sincerely tried to start over after the defeat of Morgoth, and since he has the ability to change appearance, he intended to disappear in Númenor. 7. Halbrand is very good at making weapons. I remember from Lord of the Rings that the hands of the king are the hands of a healer. We see Aragorn try to heal Frodo after he's stabbed on Weathertop, and later he heals Éowyn at the Return of the King. Again, in Tolkien's world, I don't think a true king's greatest skills would be smithing and manipulation. That sounds more like the skills of a deceiver. Okay, that was just prior to episode 6. Okay? Then in episode 6, Adam writes a separate numbered list.
Okay? Oh, there's more. Okay.
Number 1, Adar says he killed Sauron after having sacrificed so many orcs for his experiments. Halbrand seems to remember Adar, but not the other way around. Perhaps Halbrand was previously in another form, as Sauron would be. 2, there's an incredibly odd moment when Adar and Halbrand are alone after the interrogation. As Halbrand is walking out of the room, Adar asks, who are you? Cut to Halbrand from behind, who pauses slightly, doesn't answer, and then leaves. I feel like this scene wouldn't exist if we were to take Halbrand's identity at face value. So what identity would make for a satisfying reveal? Like Dawn, my backup plan would be the Witch King. But I don't think the Witch King is someone that is revealed. Rather, it is what someone becomes. Number 3, after the battle, when Halbrand is talking about the feeling he got fighting alongside Galadriel, he says he wishes he could bind it to my very being. That word bind makes me think of one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness, bind them. It's just too suspicious to be coincidence. Finally, I'm not a makeup expert, but I just feel like they've given Halbrand some very heavy eyeshadow in such a way, to me, he looks almost like an evil Aragorn just wait until they reveal his goatee. Finally, and perhaps most importantly, I think if Halbrand is Sauron, it would be the most interesting development for Galadriel's character. It plays into her brother's words, sometimes we cannot know which light to follow until we have touched the darkness. Galadriel has been headstrong and determined all season, which we admire her for, but she's also been stubborn and arrogant, and I think she's in for a rude awakening. She basically dragged Halbrand back to Middle-earth, gave him an army, and crowned him king, all because of a medallion that he found in a dead man. How crazy would it be if Gil-galad was right that the same wind that seeks to blow out a fire may also cause it spread? Thanks, and I hope that makes sense. That's Adam from Philadelphia writing into decodingtv@gmail.com. Boy, Don, I mean, that is a freaking decisive email.
In this
about
TED Talk, I will. Yeah.
that concludes Adam's TED Talk. Okay, so I have so many questions. I really have two questions.
Yes.
Don.
Yes.
Question number one: what do you think of the Halbrand Sauron theory? And question two: why the heck haven't you brought it up until this point in the podcast?
Okay, so here's the thing. I didn't know if Halbrand was Sauron. I had seen smatterings of theories and various arguments to be made one way or the other. And I've seen the Witch King, I've seen Sauron, I've seen the King of the Dead, I've seen so many. And I have now gotten to the point where, and I think after episode 7 especially, I think the theorizing is sort of taking away from my enjoyment of the show. The reason I didn't bring it up is because I wasn't convinced one way or another. To me, there wasn't a lot of evidence until episode 7 for me. And I'll get into that in a moment.
So literally all of the first 6 episodes of evidence that I just laid out was not convincing to you.
That I didn't pick up on all of the stuff that Adam wrote. So props to Adam for, catching what I missed.
Yes.
But I think knowing things that I maybe don't even want to mention on this podcast because of my book knowledge.
Yes.
I think I wanted to let Halbrand's storyline play out because think about it like this, right? If it turns out that he is actually King of the Southlands and does turn into the Witch King of Angmar or the King of the Dead, sure, it's a rushed storyline, but yeah, you were absolutely right, David. He would be Aragorn 2.0. And if he's Sauron, then it's all of this subterfuge and stuff that, like, one, I didn't have the brain power last week to try and even put together, and two, I wasn't sure, and I wasn't even sure I wanted to theorize about it. However, towards the end of this episode 7, I got a distinctive piece of information that seemed a little bit shoehorned in because, as we've previously talked about, this episode is not my favorite. I do think Halbrand, my theory is that Halbrand is Sauron.
Wow. Don speaks the words.
I do.
Decoding TV podcast. Here it
is. I'm sorry it's taken so long. I'm sorry I led you astray. But
you didn't lead me astray. You didn't lead me astray, to be clear. You were the one. You're basically the whole season. You've been saying Halbrand is not who he seems. So I just felt extremely silly that I have been going against that all season. But that's okay. That's okay. That's part of what the podcast is about. So
no thoughts, just vibes.
I think before we close off on this one point, at this moment in time, as we're recording this, we do not have confirmation of that theory, right?
No,
so it may be confirmed next episode or next season. We'll see. I do think that it's a little bit silly if Halbrand is Sauron. It's a little bit like, haha, like big twist, in a sense that doesn't feel completely earned. But I do agree that it would be an interesting development for Galadriel. That is, I'm not like, oh, this is a great idea that they did this, because I do think it's fundamentally silly to spend all season having an extremely rushed storyline with, hey, let's give Halbrand all these resources. And it's like, the whole time I'm like, why are you doing this? And then, oh, it turns out he's evil. It's like, okay, I didn't even want you to give him the resources in the first place. Like, that's silly and not great storytelling. But I do agree, good character development for Galadriel, if that happens.
Yes.
I don't know if you have any thoughts on like what it would mean for the show if Halbrand is Sauron.
How do I...
I've exhausted we haven't even started the episode. I've already exhausted.
We haven't. No, David, I'm treading on thin ice here because I'm approaching potential book spoilers.
I see.
Maybe I can make an analogy. There are certain things that the audience knows that the characters in this show do not. For example, we know Galadriel doesn't die.
Yeah. Isildur.
That's a fact. We know Isildur doesn't die. Right. Isildur is safe.
Yeah.
There are certain aspects of this theory that could lend itself to the idea that I'm treading on such thin ice now. Hang on.
Yeah.
There are theories and ideas that people have that are skirting the line between what the characters know versus what the audience knows.
Yeah.
And especially in today's modern media, it's very hard to toe that line. And I will say that there is potentially a possibility that the audience may know it is Sauron, that the elves do not.
Like there might come a time in the show when the audience realizes it, but the elves don't, and
Yes.
and do you think that'll make the show more interesting or less interesting, or?
Yes, and especially after this episode, I actually did a complete 180, and I actually disagree with a big thing that the showrunners are doing in keeping us in suspense. I think, given what we have seen in the first 7 episodes, it would have been more beneficial to know who the stranger was from the beginning, who Halbrand was from the beginning, who Theo and all of these people that could potentially be major key players in the late Second Age or Third Age. I also, if they were going to do it the way they have, I think that this show would have lent itself a little bit better to binge watching, the way they do Stranger Things. I think the question of who is the stranger has been strung on for a really long time. And while
Yes.
it's been fun to theorize, I think at the same time, if I had sat down for 8 straight hours, taken a Friday off work, and then you and I hopped on a podcast for like another 12 hours dissecting everything, that would have been great. I think the whole mystery box, sort of
Yeah.
J.J. Abrams
Yeah.
Pandora's box style, didn't lend itself to the strength of season 1. Now, if they choose to go forward in future seasons, no more mystery box. We know who everybody is, and we're
Yeah.
just watching the events play out. Good. I think that's the right decision. I don't know if they'll do that, and I don't know if we'll get all of the reveals.
Yeah. It's interesting. This is also the approach that a show like Westworld took, which this podcast previously covered, which is there's a trade-off between telling the audience who this character is and surprise, right? Because the people they want to, the showrunners, they want to surprise you. Aha, it's Sauron. Aha, it's Gandalf. Whatever. Like they want that moment for the audience where everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe it." The disadvantage of that approach is the whole time we're watching, we're not focused on what this character's motivations are because we don't know what they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know what they're doing. Like we don't know what their purpose is or who they are inside. And so we honestly don't know what we're watching. Are we watching the King of the South return victoriously to Lindon, or are we watching potentially evil force infiltrate like that's without knowing that, it's hard to formulate a strong opinion on it.
And I think I will give the showrunners this. They are making bold decisions. Whether or not that lands with the audience, with all of us, obviously not everyone's going to agree on certain things. But I think going forward, the whole mystery box thing was cool, but these bold decisions need to be made with the knowledge that we are in the 21st century. Twitter exists. You're not going to get any spoilers. Tell us from the beginning. Let us watch the journey. Full disclosure, I knew how the ending of Battlestar Galactica happened because I watched the last season with a friend of mine before I watched any of the other stuff. And going back and watching the first 4 seasons, I was like, I could appreciate the intricacies that much more. And given the intricacies that exist in Tolkien, I have now 7 episodes in. I have come to the conclusion that I think this show would have been 1, better if I could binge it, or 2, better if I had known everything beforehand.
Or in my opinion, like some mix of it. Like you can have like 1 or 2 big reveals, but I think they're just trying to save everything. And we're at the final episode, next episode, and we might not even find out Halbrand's real fate.
I think given what I saw in the first 7 episodes, I've kind of had time to think this over. I 100% now think that they are going for a 50-hour story, not 5 seasons. I think they started this from the get-go saying, we know how it's going to start. We know it's in the middle. We know how it's going to end. And that's what they're going for. Now, whether or not that is a good idea or not remains to be seen. Because again, we haven't had all 50 episodes. And if it turns out that the first 8 were just a little rough around the edges, who's to say? Who's to say?
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you to Adam for writing that into decodingtv@gmail.com. A really persuasive email, I thought.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you for making me not look silly, or like shortening the number of weeks that I look silly by 1 week. Really appreciate that. Hey everyone, David Chen here. Thank you so much for watching that video from Decoding TV. If you want to get an audio version of the show, all you got to do is go to podcast.decodingtv.com. And if you want to support what we do, get ad-free episodes of the podcast and also bonus episodes of the podcast, go to decodingtv.com and become a paid member. Of course, you can also like and subscribe for more. We appreciate it. Thanks. See you later.